Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked on Wolves. In free agency this summer, what might the Wolves be targeting? There's some question marks still about guys still on the roster, some options out there who may be back, who may not be back. But what positions may they be targeting? What are some potential, not bargain free agents, but really more mid-level names that have played rotation minutes on good teams the Wolves could look at? And then also a way to look at power rankings for next year. I'll tell you why ESPN's power rankings are, once again, wrong. Welcome in. You are Locked on Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to us by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Happy Friday, everybody. Happy weekend. Hopefully you've had a fantastic week. I want to take you into the weekend with a little bit of off-season free agency talk, as well as a peek way ahead to next year, the power rankings for the start of the year. ESPN took a stab at it, and their rankings were not right. We'll get to that at the end of the show. I want to start with the free agency talk. So we'll do that here in a minute. First of all, though, a big thank you for making this show your first listen every day. Locked On Wolves is, of course, free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find this show. You can also watch on your TV on the Roku or Amazon Fire TV. If you have either one of those, you can download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app. Listen to this show along with all the other Minnesota Locked On podcasts there. Again, Roku and Amazon Fire TV. The app's name is Locked On Sports Minnesota. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves. Don't forget the T, and also at Beecken, and that's with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll see it below on your screen. All right, so the draft is next Thursday. I promise. Next week will be almost all draft coverage. Of course, the Wolves only have the 53rd pick, but it's important to have an understanding for some of the players in the top 10 in the event that a blockbuster trade was to be agreed to on draft night or in the ensuing weeks. I don't think it's likely, but we talked a little Scoot Henderson. We talked a little Brandon Miller. Like, it's possible. So we'll talk a little more about that, but I want to focus on some possible late second round picks. The Wolves, of course, do have 53. There's always the chance they trade up, trade back, trade into the first round. The most likely scenario is, of course, they just make a pick at 53. So we'll spend a lot of next week doing that. But today I want to get a little bit into free agency. It's been a couple weeks since we've touched on the Wolves situation. I don't want to rehash all of it. But basically, where are the question marks on the Wolves rosters, and what is it most likely, or what I should say, this is a better way to say it. What are the most likely positions they're looking to fill in free agency? And I guess then related is what question marks are there. So obviously unrestricted free agents include end of rotation, like Austin Rivers, I guess, is really the only end of rotation guy that's a free agent. Legit rotation players, Naz Reid, Jalen Noel, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker are all free agents. Noel and Reid are unrestricted free agents. Alexander-Walker is a restricted free agent. So that's a little bit more complicated. Also, there's the two-way guys, too, which we won't talk about today, but Luka Garza and Matt Ryan, both restricted free agents. And then you have the guys who have some form or fashion, they have an option on their contract. So Nate Knight's likely to be back. His option's about $2 million. It's just a straight club option. I would assume he's going to be back. Taurean Prince has a partially guaranteed deal for $7.5 million next year. The Wolves just need to make a decision on his contract by, June, not January, June 28th. So what day is the draft? The 21st? So the week after, my days are correct. No, the 22nd. So within 6 days of the NBA draft, the Wolves just have to make a decision on whether or not they're guaranteeing Prince's contract for next year. So between the draft and NBA free agency, that's a $7.5 million chunk of salary cap. That's important to pay attention to what happens there. A much smaller decision to be made on Jordan McLaughlin. His $2.3 million is partially guaranteed as well, or excuse me, not guaranteed. It's not guaranteed for next year. The Wolves need to make that decision by June 30th. So just a couple of days after Taurean Prince. In between the 28th and 30th, that's kind of where all those other qualifying offers need to be extended. Alexander Walker, Garza, Ryan. Again, the latter two there being two-way players. And then Mike Conley, his his contract becomes guaranteed 48 hours after the draft. So the 24th next Saturday. I can't imagine the Wolves would not allow that contract to become guaranteed. I would expect Conley to be back. So the biggest question marks are unrestricted free agents, Naz Reid and Jaylen Noel. I think the Wolves genuinely want Naz back. I don't think they want Noel back. Obviously, Reid's going to get paid a lot more than Noel. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, restricted free agent. We don't know what happens there. And then the question of, does Prince come back? Do they bring him back and then they trade him? We don't know. So potentially the Wolves could need a backup point guard depending on how they feel about Jordan McLaughlin. I would assume he's back, but do they move him to like a third string point guard and bring in another backup point guard? Jaylen Noel's leaving, so you need another kind of combo guard, scoring two guard ideally, to come off the bench. And then you have to figure out how you're going to fill Naz Reid's role. So really backup center. And I know you have Kat and Rudy, so it's really somebody that can play a little four or maybe be, when those guys are in foul trouble or if injury strikes again, 10, 12 minutes a game as a backup center. That's going to be a difficult, I think, position to recruit. There's a lot of potential backup centers, but how many guys are going to want to come to Minnesota and play third fiddle to Kat and Rudy, two all-NBA bigs, and have limited time to actually play the center spot? So you're looking for a little bit of a unicorn there, I think, if you're the Wolves. So those are the positions, I should say, the Wolves are really looking to, fill on the roster, and primarily likely through the free agency. As we've said before, there aren't exactly a ton of trade options for the Wolves. Like they have some future second rounders you could trade. You could swap picks. Like there's a few things they could do, but it's really catch your major trade chip. You have free agency. There's not a whole lot in between, right? You're not trading McDaniels. You're not going to be able to trade Rudy if you wanted to. So there's only so much you can do, and that's where free agency comes in. And the cap space wise, as we said a couple of weeks ago, it all depends on like what you think you're doing with Naz Reid. You essentially have, and I'm ballparking this now, I don't have the exact number, but it's like 15, 16 million to play with, maybe, give or take. Can you fit Naz, Alexander-Walker, and another player into there? Maybe. Do you want to? That's another question too. I've done a couple of shows on that. Like, is it worth paying Naz Reid 14, 15 million for him to be your third big? Probably not. So what I would look to do if I'm the Wolves is I spend a little more money on the wing and guard spot, and you find a center or a big that can play the Naz Reid role. And by that, I mean, be your third big, play a little at the 4, a little bit at the 5, and slide in behind Rudy and Kat. I wouldn't spend that money. Like, I'm not going to go out and pay Jakob Poeltl $20 million a year. I mean, you couldn't really do that anyway, but like, I love Jakob Poeltl, but he's going to get a bigger role somewhere else. Right. And there's a bunch of guys we could say that about. So all that to say, there's 3 players that I like from a not quite a bargain perspective. If you go to, I think it's Hoops Hype, or no, actually Spot Rack has a really nice free agency tool where you can sort by a variety of different things. They actually rank everybody into tiers as starters, rotation guys, bench guys. So none of these guys would fit into the starter category according to Spot Rack. That's one opinion, but like none of them are like true full-time starter level type guys, I don't think. And they'll likely fall into the role player category, but like an important role player, obviously, right? Like these minutes, if you're backfilling Jaylen Noel, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and Naz Reid minutes, those are big minutes. Like those are like essentially in some order 6, 7, 8 spots in your rotation, or I guess Kyle Anderson's probably 6. So you're 7, 8, 9 spots in your rotation. You still have to fill. So what players make the most sense? Well, let's start in the backcourt. I think there's a couple of players that I like that could fill the Jaylen Noel role and also pull a little bit from Jordan McLaughlin as well. Let's start with I think more of a 2. So I guess more of a traditional, the Jaylen Noel role. So we'll start there. And then I want to get to a more of a point guard, somebody who could take McLaughlin's role, and then get to a big. There's 3 players I want to cover today. So we're going to get to that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends over at Birddogs. I started wearing Birddogs a couple of weeks ago, and it's I don't think it's too much of an exaggeration to say that they've been life-changing. I mean, I don't wear my khaki shorts anymore. I just wear Birddogs everywhere I go. Like, you can legit wear them to the store on a Saturday morning, wear them home to hang around the house, go to a barbecue that night, go cook out at a buddy's house and wear those Birddogs all day long. They're comfortable in every setting. They feel like you're wearing basketball shorts, like you're just lounging around in lounge shorts or athletic shorts, but they look like you're wearing like khakis or golf shorts or something like that. Birddogs stretch khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, and they truly give you a sculpted look. If I don't say so myself, my legs look fantastic in Birddogs. Birddog shorts do the exact same thing as, like, say, Lululemon might do, but they actually fit way better. They're better than regular shorts that are made of stiff, restricting cotton. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA for a free Yeti-style tumbler with your order. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA for a free Yeti-style tumbler. You won't want to take off your Bird Dogs. We promise you that. Locked On's NBA mock draft special is here, and it's bigger than ever. Follow along the entire first round in a 6-episode ultimate mock draft experience only Locked On can deliver. All episodes are available right now on Locked On NBA Big Board on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. All right, continuing the free agency discussion, 3 guys I want to talk about. Let's actually start at the point guard spot. So really a combo guard who's more of a point guard who I think would fit what the Wolves need really, really well. And that's Jevon Carter. Of course, with Milwaukee here the last couple of seasons, the last season and a half, I guess, after coming over from Brooklyn. Let's start with what he's good at and why I like the fit. First of all, he's a 40% three-point shooter. He shot 42% this year. He's 39.7% for his career. The only season he shot worse than 37%, so worse than league average rounding up, was his rookie year as a part-time player with the Memphis Grizzlies. Besides that, he's been fantastic. So basically a 40% career three-point shooter. He's a good defender. He is I would say a plus defender, really, really good at defending the point of attack. He's not big, which is maybe my only real concern is he's a little bit of a bigger build in terms of strength and athletic build than say Jordan McLaughlin, but he's a similar height. He's a little bigger, but only moderately so. So you're not gaining much there, but he's absolutely a better shooter. He gives you more punch from a scoring perspective because of that. He's still a good free throw shooter. Not like he gets to the line a lot, but he's reliable in that regard. And he doesn't really turn the ball over. He's also not a high usage guy. Like he's not going to be looking for his shot, throughout the course of a game, right? Like that's not his role in that regard, similar to Jordan McLaughlin. But the profile of a low usage, low turnover, good shooting point guard who can command an offense and initiate an offense, but also be really good at the point of attack. It's like a better version of Jordan McLaughlin. Like there's a ton of similarities. He's got that toughness factor. He's obviously kind of an energy guy, plays hard like Jordan McLaughlin, but again, tougher, a hard-nosed defender, a little bit bigger. And I think that helps him from a defensive standpoint. I really like Jevon Carter. I think that he has a player option. Yeah, he's a player option on this year's next year with Milwaukee for $2.2 million. He's almost certainly going to opt out of that and hit the free agency market. I think he could get $5-6 million on the market. And honestly, we'll talk about a couple of other guys here, but I'd rather go shopping and call it $4.5 million for Jevon Carter and maybe still keep Jordan McLaughlin. I mean, I think they were a little redundant at that point, but you can let McLaughlin go, save your $2.2 million that you're paying McLaughlin, bring Carter in at $4.5 million, and that difference is only a couple million. You can then use that to go and keep Nickeil Alexander-Walker or get one of the other guys I'm about to talk about. But in my mind, it's a slightly more expensive but better version of Jordan McLaughlin. And I would side Jevon. Like I'd go after Jevon Carter. Now he's going to have no shortage of teams looking for him because he played, like, I know Milwaukee had a disappointing end of the season, but this was the best team in the league, certainly in the Eastern Conference for much of the year. And he played 22 minutes a game for them, actually started almost half the season, primarily at point guard. But to bring him in and play him behind Mike Conley, he's not like in 2 years, he's going to be 29 years old, and there's a ceiling on his upside, obviously, and what he brings to the table. So you still need your point guard of the future to replace Conley. But to be a Conley backup and even play next to Conley at times, depending on matchups and foul trouble and all that stuff, Jevon Carter is a really, really nice pickup. You could kind of slide in as part of the mid-level or even just using the cap space that they have, which isn't much, depending on your decision with Alexander Walker, with to a lesser extent if you bring back Jordan McLaughlin, but obviously Naz Reid as well. Jevon Carter, to me, is worth paying twice as much for him as it would be for Jordan McLaughlin. Another backcourt member I'd look at who's primarily a shooting guard would be Seth Curry. Seth Curry had another season over 40% last year. Every single season of his career, he shot greater than 40% from the field. This was actually his worst season at 40.5%. Sorry, not from the field, from three-point range. For his career, 43.5% from three-point range. He's only a year removed. Remember splitting, what was it, 2 years ago, the 21-22 season between Philadelphia and Brooklyn. He averaged 15 points per game. Saw a much smaller role in, I don't know, we could call Brooklyn a circus for this last year. In Brooklyn, he was down to 9 points per game, but primarily came off the bench. In his age 33 season, I mean, that's his role, right? He's still not a good defender, although he's not as bad as a lot of guys who are only shoot. Like, he's not Bryn Forbes level of bad defensively, right? Even at his size, he's obviously nowhere near as good as, say, like, I'm going to do it anyway. He's not anywhere near as good as his brother as an undersized guard defensively, but he's better than a Bryn Forbes. He's better in my mind than D'Angelo Russell, who has size on Seth Curry. You can plug him into your rotation on a playoff team. Obviously, that's what he's done, right? He's almost exclusively played on playoff teams over the past 4 or 5 seasons. So there's a lot to like about Seth Curry. He's going to cost a lot more than Javon Carter. I know it just talked about Javon Carter, who will almost certainly get less than $5 million. Seth Curry's probably going to get most of the mid-level exceptions, so like 10, 12 million. You're only really signing Seth Curry if you're convinced that his punch off the bench is what you're missing, and you're not bringing back Naz Reid. Now, a big problem with last year's team was the inability of the bench to consistently score and the inefficiency of Jalen Noel. And Seth Curry is very efficient, right? I mean, he doesn't get to the line a ton, but he's an 86% free throw shooter. He's a 43.5% career three-point shooter. He's can hold his own defensively. I would argue he's a better defender than Jalen Noel in a vacuum. So is that worth it? I mean, I don't know. Like, does it make more? And I know we love Naz Reid. I know Wolves fans love Naz Reid. But as I said the other day on the show, is it worth sinking, call it 12, 14 million into Naz Reid, a position that you already have Rudy and you already have Cat? Or does it make more sense to pick up somebody who could be your high usage bench scorer, but also is happy to play the sharpshooter role next to Anthony Edwards, sliding it to the 3? You have Conley and Curry in the backcourt. Yes, he's undersized, but the shooting element is so important, spreading the floor. When you have Ant and you have, in this scenario, still have Karl-Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert, you need that floor stretching. Seth Curry is one of the best in the league at that. And it might be worth $11, $12 million to do that. I like Seth Curry as an option for the Wolves. And I would not run from that possibility and would actually rather apply that chunk of change to Seth Curry than I would to Naz Reid. And I know that that's a lot of people are going to hate that, but I that's where I'm at with the Naz Reid situation. The last name I'll mention today is one that could factor if Naz does move on. That would be Paul Reed, of course, formerly of I guess still a member of the Philadelphia 76ers. He is a low-minute backup, like averaged 10 minutes a game essentially over the last, less than that a couple of years ago. Only 11 minutes a game this year for the Sixers. So I'm all over the map here. Javon Carter is going to be a primary rotation guy, but probably $4 or $5 million. Seth Curry is a primary rotation guy, but probably $12 million-ish. Paul Reed, I don't have a great handle on what he's going to cost, but it's going to be on the low end, obviously. I think it's probably $4 or $5 million maybe, but he's also only 10, 12 minutes a game. Could be exactly what the Wolves are looking for to put behind Karl-Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert. He's going to be in foul trouble. He doesn't stretch the floor at all offensively. I think he can play a little at the 4. He's a little undersized maybe, but he can play a little at the 4. He's such a good rebounder though, that it's worth it. Like, what are the Wolves missing? It's rebounding. It's bench rebounding. Naz struggles to rebound as an undersized 5. Now it's not always the bigs because Kat and Rudy are fine rebounders, and Naz was actually pretty good this year on the glass. The rest of the team struggles, but adding more good rebounders to the mix are going to help your team rebound better. And Paul Reed does that. He had a 20.5% rebound rate this year, 23.1% defensive rebound rate. Yes, it was only 11 minutes a game, but it was also over 69 games. He was a regular rotation member for the Sixers this year. Does not add anything offensively. He is strictly a 3rd or 4th big that you're going to pay a smaller salary. But from a rebound perspective, he fits what the Wolves need. And he's got, again, a little bit undersized, but has played for winning teams, has played played behind Joel Embiid the last couple of years, last 3 years. So playing behind Karl-Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert, that's not a role that's like out of the norm for him. And I really like him he's more of a bargain type, name that you'd be looking at. But if the Wolves went shopping and said, like, we'll let Nas walk, we'll sign Paul Reed, we'll sign Nikhil Alexander, we'll bring back Nikhil Alexander Walker, we'll sign Javon Carter, that would be fine. You sign Seth Curry and you sign Paul Reed. And now you still got to find a wing defender, but maybe you're counting on Josh Minott and Wendell Moore Jr. to pick up bigger roles. Seth Curry becomes your bench scorer. Paul Reed's your backup center, and you bring back Nate Knight. So those are your 4 bigs: Rudy Cat, Paul Reed, and Nate Knight. Maybe even bring back Luka Garza for a second. You're on a 2-way, because why not? But then your backcourt, you have Conley, you have Javon Carter, Seth Curry to mix in and play a little bit of, can run some point if you need him to. And you obviously have Ant, who's going to run some second team offense. So that would be not a bad blueprint for this offseason. Again, not knowing exactly what these guys are going to command in free agency, but you can mix and match with those 3 and the Wolves' own pending free agents and come up with a pretty nice offseason for the Wolves, in my opinion. All right, let's close today by laughing a little bit together at the ESPN power rankings for next year and where the Timberwolves rank. So we'll do that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors over at Game Time. If you're like me, occasionally you might wait to the last minute to make a decision on tickets for a concert or a sporting event, but that's where Game Time comes in. Buying tickets to your favorite events should not be stressful. Game Time is the place for last-minute ticket deals. Forget planning months in advance. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event. Get exclusive flash deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. The Game Time guarantee means that you will always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. It's the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. Get images of your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Buy tickets in a matter of seconds. 2 taps and you're all set. Tickets are sent directly to your phone, so you never have to dig through your email. Snag your tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, so ESPN issued what they admit in the headline is the NBA Power Rankings Way Too Early edition, our first look at 23-24. These were published on, I guess, earlier this week. I guess like on Tuesday. I missed it somehow. And so, yeah, I guess in the wake of the finals ending. And, of course, Denver's first and Boston is second. That does make sense, actually, to have Boston ahead of Miami. Miami's third, on down the list. So where did the Timberwolves rank? I actually kind of thought they'd be closer to 20. So it was pleasantly surprising when they were at 16 in the power rankings. But it's not so much that they're 16th, because that's about right. I mean, like, how else do you do this, right? You take the finals, you say, we actually think Boston's better than Miami moving forward. But basically, you're taking the 16 playoff teams and putting them in the top 16 spots, give or take, right? It's a pretty good starting point. But the Wolves are 16th behind the Oklahoma City Thunder at 15th, who, of course, the Wolves beat in the second play-in game. The New Orleans Pelicans, who lost to the Thunder in the play-in, and the Wolves beat in the penultimate game of the regular season at 14. So 2 teams the Wolves beat in the final week of the season are right ahead of them, the Pelicans and Thunder. The Clippers are at 13. I mean, I don't know. Like that to me is, those 3 to me are the most egregious. The Cavs at 12, I get they had a disappointing end of the season. They've got a lot of upside moving forward. Evan Mobley, and in general, they just have a really young, I guess, core. Sacramento at 11. By the way, I went on Locked On Kings today, for today's show. So I believe Friday's Locked On Kings, I did a full show mostly about Naz Reid with Matt George of Locked On Kings. So go check that out if you want to hear me talk about Naz Reid for 30 minutes. But it was a good conversation. Talked a little bit about how the Kings were the last team the Wolves beat in the playoffs, which, or won a series against in the playoffs. What was that, 19 years ago? And, it was a good conversation. So go check that out. The Knicks at 9 feels a little bit aggressive as well. I know they won a playoff series, but like, are we really relying on this thing to, it's just, there's nothing you can really hang your hat on with the Knicks besides Tibbs being a good coach and like Jalen Brunson being exciting and Emmanuel Quickly, he's good. Julius Randle took a minor step back this year. I don't know. The Knicks at 9 is aggressive. I understand them being ahead of the Wolves. I'm not saying the Knicks should be behind the Wolves, but like the Warriors are at 10. Like the Warriors should be ahead of the Knicks. I know the Knicks had a better regular season. I know they went further in the play or to the same. They both went to the second round of the playoffs. but I would still put the Warriors ahead of the Knicks. I would probably put the Kings ahead of the Knicks. This is just, again, the Knicks bump, I guess, even in power rankings. But I don't understand. Like, I actually think you could argue putting the Thunder ahead of the Wolves, but we're still projecting here. Like, what else has developed around SGA? Obviously, Chet Holmgren should be back, but like, how good will he be from day one? How will they sync up as a team? I know they got out to a really hot start last year. I think the opposite may happen. They may get out to a slow start as they integrate Chet Holmgren, and then, maybe a close or a better finish to the year for OKC. But right now, I would put the Wolves ahead of the Pelicans. I would put the Wolves ahead of the Clippers. I don't think it makes sense to do these power rankings based on supposed absolute health, because like, we also don't know who actually is going to be on these rosters, right? Like, we don't know what the rotations are going to look like for these teams that have to fill bench spots, including the Wolves. But if we're doing this based on high-end talent, you have to factor in the likelihood guys will be hurt. Towns has been hurt a lot, but it's not chronic stuff, knock on wood, and he'll be back, right? Ant has been healthy, knock on wood. Zion Williamson has not been healthy. Kawhi Leonard and Paul George Kawhi Leonard's never been healthy. Paul George hasn't been healthy in a while. Didn't even play in the first round last year, right? I think it's crazy to have the Wolves down at 16 and have the Clippers and Pelicans at 13 and 14. I would put the Wolves at 13. I would put the Thunder at 14. And then I would go in some order. I'd probably put Clippers 15, Pelicans 16. Dallas is down at 17. You could argue that Dallas should be ahead of, I know they're a mess right now, but the high-end potential with Luka, and again, Luka, knock on wood, has been largely healthy as well. So I don't understand putting the Pelicans and the Clippers ahead of teams like Dallas, OKC, and the Wolves. I just don't think that makes sense. But all that to say, the Wolves are a middle of the pack team right now. That's where they're at. The ceiling is still much higher. I thought they'd be a 5 or 6 seed last year. I thought they could finish as high as 4th. That would have put them, in the top 10 range in a offseason power rankings. And now there's nothing they're going to do from a high-end talent perspective to rise in any sort of offseason power rankings, no matter what they do on draft night. Honestly, whether or not they trade Karl-Anthony Towns, I don't think that moves them in a ranking like this. Like, if power rankings are important to you, buckle in for a long offseason of a lot of the same for the Wolves, because it all depends on Ant's progression and the ability of Ant and Rudy, and also Kat and Rudy, to integrate together and play well together, grow together next year, more than anything else. The fringe rotation moves, I'm going to dive into that minutia, and I'll tell you on this show if I think it's going to make the Wolves better or worse next year. And absolutely they matter, because we're sitting here now talking about Bruce Brown and Christian Brown and Jeff Green and these rotation guys for the Nuggets that made such a big difference in the playoffs. Look at Miami, Jimmy Butler, an old Kyle Lowry, obviously Bam Adebayo, and a bunch of rotation role player type guys. Those moves matter. They don't matter in a power rankings. Like, if the Wolves do any of what I talked about in the second segment of today's show, it's not going to move them from 16 to 15 to 13 to 12 or down to 20. It's not going to matter. They're going to be middle of the pack. It's the growth of Ant, the integration of Rudy and Kat, and how they work together. And then if whether or not they make a big move, and then it's the moves on the fringes are the things that will actually matter, even if they don't come through in the national conversation. And that's what we're going to see a lot of this offseason. The Wolves aren't going to be a hot topic once we know that Kat isn't getting traded, or after a Kat trade potentially happens. That's it. It's not like last offseason when it's a whole like, well, how will the Rudy experiment work? And everybody wanted to talk Wolves. That's not what this offseason is. Everyone's decided that the Wolves have failed this Rudy experiment, even if that's unfair. And now it's all about Tim Connolly's time. He's got to do what he did in Denver and make those moves around the edges. All right, that's all I have for you today on the show. Of course, we'll be back next week. Draft talk throughout next week, Monday through Friday. Again, listen to Locked On Kings today, please. I was on the show with Matt George, the fantastic host of Locked On Kings. We had a great conversation, so go check that out. Otherwise, have a great weekend. We'll see you on Monday. A big thank you for making this show your first listen every day. This show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch the show on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. Of course, every day is tomorrow on the show. Well, no, not tomorrow. Monday on the show, we'll be talking NBA draft. Buckle up. The draft is next Thursday night. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.